The train was 40 minutes late, and Margaret Holloway had already counted the ceiling tiles 3 times. She sat on a wooden bench at platform 4 of the Krakow Central Station, her back straight in the way that wasn't confidence but pure exhaustion pretending to be dignity. Her coat was clean. Her shoes were polished. These 2 things she controlled every morning the way some people pray, with deliberate, quiet desperation. Because everything else in her life at that particular moment was operating without her permission. Beside her, 7-year-old Sophie was asleep with her cheek pressed against Margaret's arm, her small mouth slightly open, her brown hair falling across her face in tangled ribbons. She hadn't eaten since the sandwich Margaret had bought at the station cafe 3 hours ago, half a sandwich, because Margaret had quietly pocketed the other half and called it dinner. They were going to Wrocław. That was the plan, anyway. That was always the plan now, the next city, the next position, the next family that needed a nanny who came with a child attached like a footnote they hadn't planned for. Margaret was 34 years old, and she was very good at her job, and she was completely broke. She had been the live-in nanny for the Brzeski family in Warsaw for 2 years when Mr. Brzeski's company folded. Mrs. Brzeski's family arrived from Gdansk to take over the apartment, and Margaret found herself standing on a pavement in November with 2 suitcases, 1 daughter, and 3 weeks of wages in an envelope that Mrs. Brzeski had pressed into her hands with the slightly guilty speed of someone releasing a pigeon they'd accidentally trapped. "You are so wonderful with children," Mrs. Brzeski had said. And Margaret had nodded, because it was true and it wasn't enough and there was nothing useful to say about that. That had been 6 weeks ago. She had done 2 short-term positions since, one family whose children she genuinely loved and one where the father had looked at her in a way she recognized, a way she had learned to recognize before she was 20, a way that meant she and Sophie were packed and gone by the following Thursday. There had been a week in a hostel in Lodz. There had been the sandwich divided in 2. And now there was the Wrocław family. A good agency. Good references. A big house near the river with 2 boys aged 4 and 9, which was exactly the combination of ages Margaret was best at, the age where children needed someone to teach them that the world was both serious and fun and that neither cancelled the other out. She had taken the job without hesitation. She was good at that. Making herself move before the fear had time to sit down. The announcement came over the loudspeaker in Polish, then German, then English. The train would arrive in 22 minutes, delayed due to a technical issue on the line outside Katowice. Margaret exhaled slowly and reached into her bag for her notebook. She wrote lists when she was anxious. Not action lists. Just words. Things she could see. Things she knew for certain. Bench. Sophie's hair. The smell of diesel and something fried from the station cafe. The blue scarf of the woman across the platform. Rain on the skylight above. 22 minutes. She was on her 3rd page when it happened. She heard it before she saw it, a low, rhythmic clanging, metal against metal, somewhere to her left past the end of the platform. Like someone very large was walking with something very heavy attached to their leg. Which, she would learn later, was exactly what was happening. Then, she saw him. He came through the side gate, the maintenance access gate, not the passenger entrance, and he was tall enough that Margaret's first genuine thought was that she was looking at a man who should play professional basketball and had simply chosen not to. He wore a dark coat, charcoal gray, expensive, the kind that was cut for broad shoulders and swept nearly to the knee. His hair was black and slightly disheveled in a way that was either carefully curated or genuine disaster, she couldn't tell yet. His face was the kind that Sophie, when she was older and Margaret was retelling this story, would call aggressively handsome, and Margaret would agree and add aggressively annoying about it. But none of that was what made the entire platform turn to stare. What made the platform turn to stare was the chain. It was fastened around his left ankle, solid iron fold, the links thick as a man's thumb, and dragged behind him across the platform tiles with that low, terrible clang. The chain was attached to a second length that ran to a metal ring bolted into the station wall, near the maintenance access gate. He was pulling at it with each step, as if he had been walking for a long time and was very tired of the resistance, and was continuing to walk anyway because stopping was simply not something he was prepared to do. He walked to the center of platform 4 and sat down on a bench 3 meters from Margaret. He looked at no one. He folded his hands in his lap with the precise, contained quality of someone who had decided long ago that making other people comfortable with his presence was not his responsibility. Margaret looked at him. She looked at the chain. She looked at the maintenance gate. Her notebook was open to a page that said, bench, Sophie's hair, diesel, blue scarf, rain, 22 minutes. She wrote, chain. Then, she wrote, why. Then, she crossed out why, because it was not a concrete observable thing and her list was for concrete observable things. Sophie made a small sound in her sleep and burrowed her face harder into Margaret's arm, and Margaret automatically tucked the collar of Sophie's coat up against the cold. The man with the chain did not look at them. A family at the far end of the platform gathered their luggage and moved to the other end. A teenage boy took out his phone. A station employee appeared at the top of the stairs, looked at the man with the chain, and then looked at the station employee behind him, and both of them communicated something wordlessly and retreated back down the stairs. Margaret watched all of this. She was very good at reading rooms. You learned it when you were a child in a house where the temperature changed without warning. You learned it again when you were 22 and alone with a newborn in a city where your own family had decided your choices were not their problem. You catalogued what people did. You read what their bodies decided before their mouths got involved. The man with the chain had not done anything threatening. He had sat down. He had folded his hands. His jaw was set in a way that suggested considerable internal conflict that he was currently winning against. The station employees had retreated because he was large and strange and the chain made a sound that nobody wanted to have to explain in a report. The family had moved because the chain made people instinctively calculate distance. Margaret understood all of this. She also understood that the man had not eaten recently, from the specific hollow quality around his eyes, the way his cheekbones read is sharper than they were probably meant to be. She had learned that particular look from the inside. Sophie woke up. She woke up the way she always did, not gradually, not groggily, but completely, all at once, like a lamp switched on. She sat up, blinked, registered her surroundings with the uncanny efficiency of a child who had moved around enough to learn that the first thing you do in a new place is figure out where you are. She looked at the platform. She looked at her mother. She looked at the man with the chain. "Mama," she said, in a whisper that was not quite whisper volume, "that man has a chain on his foot." "I see that," Margaret said. "Is he a prisoner?" "I don't know yet. He looks sad." Margaret considered this. He did not look sad, exactly. He looked like someone who had made sadness completely irrelevant to his current operational requirements. Which, she would have argued, was a specific kind of sad. "Maybe," she said. Sophie studied him with the absolute shamelessness of a 7-year-old. The man, after a moment, turned his head and looked at Sophie with the expression of someone who had not expected to be observed and was recalculating. "Your chain is very loud," Sophie informed him. There was a pause. "Yes," he said. His English was accented Eastern European, Margaret thought, possibly Romanian or Bulgarian, the consonants carrying a certain formal weight. "I apologize." "It's okay. I don't mind loud things. My mama says I am a loud thing." His mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the shape a face makes when it remembers, briefly, that smiling is something it knows how to do. "She is correct," he said, "in that you are louder than the chain." Sophie considered this as a serious observation and nodded. "My name is Sophie. That's my mama, Margaret. We're going to Wrocław." He looked at Margaret then, for the first time, and Margaret looked back at him the way she looked at everything, directly, without embarrassment, cataloging. Up close, his eyes were dark and tired in a way that went beyond sleep. There was a bruise along his jaw that he had not bothered to conceal or explain. His hands, folded in his lap, had the knuckles of someone who had recently been in a situation that his knuckles had objected to. "I am André," he said. Not his last name. Just André. The way people give their name when they are not sure how much of themselves they're permitted to offer. "Are you waiting for a train?" Margaret asked. He looked at the chain. He looked at the maintenance gate. He looked back at her. I am, he said, waiting for someone to decide whether I am allowed to be on a train. Margaret nodded slowly. Someone put the chain on you. Yes. And left. A pause. Temporarily. And you're all right? Physically? He looked at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. It was somewhere between the look people give when they receive unexpected kindness from a stranger and the look people give when they are deciding whether unexpected kindness is a threat. I am functional, he said. That's not the same as all right. He said nothing. Sophie had climbed off the bench while they were talking and was now crouching down to look at the chain up close, with the investigative seriousness of a scientist examining a specimen. Sophie, Margaret said. I'm just looking, Sophie said. It's a very old chain. The links are different from modern chains. See, Mama, the edges are beveled differently. Margaret looked at her daughter. How do you know what beveled means? Mr. Kamsky told me. He was a locksmith. Sophie looked up at Andrei. Mr. Kamsky was the papa of the last family we stayed with. He taught me about locks. I know how lots of locks work. Andrei looked at Sophie. Then, he looked at Margaret. Your daughter, he said, is remarkable. She is, Margaret said. She is also 7 and has been awake for 6 hours and her blood sugar is probably low, which means we have about 10 minutes before she becomes a different kind of remarkable. Something shifted in his face. Not quite softening. More like recognition. He reached into the interior pocket of his coat and produced, with the careful movement of someone whose ribs were probably not entirely comfortable, a wrapped bar of dark chocolate. He held it out towards Sophie. Sophie looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at the chocolate. She looked at the man. She thought about the hostel in Lodz. She thought about half a sandwich. Thank you, she said. Sophie took the chocolate with both hands and, the specific reverence children give to gifts from strangers when they are hungry and polite enough to remember to be grateful. The platform announcement crackled above them. The train to Wrocław would now be arriving in 10 minutes. Margaret began to organize their bags. Sophie ate chocolate. The chain dragged against the platform tiles every time Andrei shifted his weight, that low, resonant clang that everyone else on the platform was carefully not looking at. You're not going to ask, he said. Margaret glanced up. Ask what? Why the chain? Who put it there? What I did. She looked at him for a moment. Did you do something that hurt someone innocent? A beat. No. Then, I don't need to know tonight, she said. Tonight you're a man on a platform who gave my daughter chocolate. That's the version of you I have. He was quiet for a long time. The rain came harder against the skylight. The man who put the chain there, he said finally, will come back. He will tell you things about me. Significant things. They will be true. Okay. You are not concerned. Margaret finished zipping the bag and looked at him directly. Mr. Andrei, she said, I have been in enough rooms in my life to know that the version of a person that their enemies carry is not the whole version. When your man comes back, I will listen to what he says. And, then, I will make up my own mind. He looked at her the way the wall looks at you right before you realize it's not a wall. The train arrived. And Andrei was still chained to the wall. Margaret Holloway did not get on the train. This was not a decision she made with any drama or deliberation. The train arrived, the doors opened, the platform filled with the organized chaos of people who had somewhere to be and were prepared to use their luggage as weapons to get there. Sophie was already on her feet, her small backpack adjusted, her chocolate finished, her hand tucked into Margaret's. Margaret looked at the train. She looked at Andrei. He was watching the train the way prisoners watch the door of a room they are not allowed to leave, with the absolute stillness of someone who has decided that wanting things is not useful. She thought about the Wrocław family. The big house. The 2 boys. The good agency. She thought about her bank account, which currently had enough money in it for approximately 1 week of dignity before it started borrowing against hope. She sat back down on the bench. Sophie, who had been mid-step toward the train door, looked up at her mother with the radar precision of a child who understands that plans have changed before the adult is ready to explain why. "We're not going?" Sophie said. "Not this one," Margaret said. Sophie looked at André. She looked at the chain. She looked at her mother. "Okay," she said, and sat down, and opened her backpack to look for something to do with her hands. The train doors closed. The train left. Margaret watched it go with the expression she reserved for things she had already finished mourning, which was no expression at all. "You missed your train," André said. It was not a question. It was the tone of a man who was trying to decide how to feel about a thing he had not asked for. "Yes." "Why?" Margaret looked at the chain. At the bruise on his jaw. At the maintenance gate, which led to wherever the person who had put the chain on him had gone. "Because," she said, "someone who knows about chains, locks, and how they work is going to be back in a few minutes, and if that person decides they don't need a witness, then no one will know where you were." He stared at her. "I am a witness," Sophie announced from inside her backpack. "You are 7, André said. 7-year-olds can be witnesses. I already told the station employee at the coffee kiosk that you were here. I told him your name was André and you had a chain and you'd given me chocolate." André turned to Margaret. "I taught her that," Margaret said calmly. "Tell someone. Anyone. Before you don't have the chance." He was quiet for a long time. The platform was emptying out now. 2 more trains had been announced and 1 had departed. The rain outside was solidifying into something heavier, real November rain that didn't apologize. In the fluorescent light of Platform 4, the iron links of the chain had a dull, almost ancient sheen, the kind of thing you'd find in a museum under a placard that said Restraint Device, Eastern Europe, estimated 18th century, but it was not in a museum. It was on the ankle of a man in a good coat who smelled of wood smoke and cold weather and something Margaret could not identify, something mineral and old, like the inside of a stone church. "The man who chained me," André said finally, "is named Gavril. He is my brother." Margaret waited. "We have a disagreement." "About what?" A long pause. "About what I am. About what I should do with what I am. About a family matter that has been unresolved since," he stopped. Started again. "For a long time." "Is he dangerous? To you?" "No. Gavril would not harm a woman and a child. He chose his word carefully, principled. In his way. He has principles I disagree with, and I have principles he finds intolerable, and so." He indicated the chain with one precise gesture. "And you?" Margaret said. "Are you dangerous?" He looked at her again in that way, evaluating, recalibrating. "I am capable of being dangerous," he said. "I choose not to be. Frequently. With some effort. That's honest. You asked an honest question." Sophie had found a small book in her backpack, a paperback with a cracked spine that she'd already read 4 times, and was reading it now with the self-contained focus of a child who has learned that the best way to be present in adult conversations without being sent away is to appear to be doing something else. Margaret looked at her daughter. The worn shoes. The clean coat. The 4th rereading of a book she loved enough to carry across cities. She looked at André. "How long has he been gone?" she asked. "Approximately 2 hours." "And when does he come back?" "He said he would return before the last train." Margaret checked the time. The last train to Wrocław left at 22:47. It was 2014. 2.5 hours. "Are you hungry?" she said. He looked at her with the expression of a man encountering a question he had not organized a proper answer for. "I do not," he stopped. "I'm asking if you'd like something warm to drink while we wait," Margaret said. "The cafe is still open. I can bring it here." His jaw worked slightly. Something moved across his face that he closed down before it finished arriving. "Tea," he said. "If it is not too much." Margaret stood and looked at Sophie. "Come with me." They went to the cafe together, and Margaret bought 2 teas and a hot chocolate and a small pastry that the man behind the counter gave her for half price because it was nearly closing, and Sophie had looked at it with the specific expression of a child who would absolutely never ask for anything but was also absolutely dying. When they came back, Andre was sitting exactly as they'd left him, same posture, same stillness, same contained quality of a large animal pretending to be furniture. He took the tea with both hands. He said nothing. But his shoulders dropped, very slightly, in the way that bodies do when something tight in them eases by 1 degree. They sat in a row on the bench, Margaret, Sophie, and 3 feet of space between Sophie and Andre that Sophie was slowly, methodically, without fanfare or acknowledgement, closing with small incremental shifts of her weight across the bench. "In my book," Sophie said, to no one in particular, "the lord of the castle is very old and very lonely, and he doesn't know how to talk to people anymore. So he just stands at the window and watches the village." "What kind of book is this?" Andre said. "It's a sort of fairy tale book. My grandmother gave it to me. She said she got it in Romania." A pause. "Romania," Andre said. "Have you been there?" Sophie asked. "I am from there." Sophie considered this with solemn gravity. "The lord in my book is from somewhere in the mountains. He has a castle and no one comes to visit him. He is scary on the outside, but the book says he is very sad on the inside because being scary is the only thing he knows how to be." Andre looked at his tea. "This is a very insightful book," he said. "My grandmother was a very insightful person," Sophie said. Margaret was watching the maintenance gate. It had been almost exactly the moment Andre shifted his weight and the chain rang against the tile that she saw Gavril. He came through the maintenance gate the way someone comes through a door when they are not sure whether the conversation on the other side of it is going to go the way they want, with a certain preparedness that wasn't quite aggression and wasn't quite caution but lived somewhere between them. He was shorter than Andre by several inches, darker featured, with the kind of face that would be striking if it were less currently occupied with displeasure. He wore a coat that might once have been military. His eyes were dark and very sharp, and they went immediately to Andre, and then to Margaret, and then to Sophie, and his stride slowed. "Andre," he said, in a tone that carried considerable freight. "Gavril," Andre said. "Who are these people?" "They are Margaret and Sophie. They missed their train." "Why did they miss their train?" "Because I was chained to a wall and they have manners," Andre said, with a flatness that suggested he had spent considerable time preparing that sentence. Gavril looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at Gavril. She had catalogued him in approximately 4 seconds. He was afraid. Not of her, of the situation. Of what might happen next. He had put the chain on Andre because he was afraid of what Andre might do, not because he wanted to hurt him. She could tell the difference. She had extensive experience with both. "Mrs. Holloway," Gavril said. Because he had clearly done research in the 2 hours he'd been gone. "You are the nanny." "I am," Margaret said. "You should not be here." "I'm aware of that." "Then, and yet," she said. He stopped. Sophie looked up from her book. She looked at Gavril. She looked at Andre. She looked at the chain. "Are you going to unlock it now?" she asked Gavril. Gavril blinked. "What?" "The chain," Sophie said patiently. "You put it there. You should take it off now. It's been a long time and he's had tea and he didn't do anything bad while you were gone." "Child," Gavril said, "you do not understand the situation. I understand that he's been sitting here for more than 2 hours with a chain on him in a train station and nobody has helped him," Sophie said, "and that seems unkind." "It is complicated." "Most unkind things are," Sophie said. Margaret looked at her daughter. She would ask her later where she had learned that, and Sophie would shrug and say it was just obvious, and Margaret would think about it for a long time afterward. Gavril was staring at Sophie the way people stare at children who have just said something that reached into their chest cavity and rearranged something without asking permission. She is, he started.
7, Andre said. She is 7.
And, she is correct.
Gavril's jaw tightened. He looked at Andre.
Something passed between them in the language of people who had been fighting the same fight for so long they'd stopped needing all the words. If I unlock it, Gavril said, you will not do what you said you would do.
I told you I would not. You told me that before.
This time there are witnesses, Andre said, and looked at Margaret.
This time someone knows where I am and what I've said. Which makes it a different kind of promise. Gavril turned to Margaret. His expression was complicated. It was the expression of a man who had built a wall around a problem he couldn't solve, and a stranger had just walked through a door he'd forgotten to close. You don't know what he is, Gavril said.
I know what he's done in the last 2 hours, Margaret said.
He sat here. He drank tea. He talked to my daughter about a book set in Romania. He gave her chocolate when she was hungry. She paused.
Whatever else he is, that's what he's done.
Gavril was quiet.
The station announcement crackled overhead. The last train to Wrocław would depart platform 4 at 22:47.
Current time 21:03.
Sophie closed her book. She stood up, walked the 3 feet to Andre, and sat back down right next to him this time, close enough that her shoulder was near his arm.
Not touching. Just near. He looked at her.
My grandmother used to say, Sophie told him, that a person is not the worst thing they've ever done. She said they are all the things they've done, and you have to add them up properly.
Andre looked at this child for a long time.
Then, he looked at Gavril. And Gavril, who had crossed 2 countries to chain his brother to a wall because he was terrified of what that brother might become, reached into his coat pocket and took out a key. The chain came off with a sound like an exhaled breath.
Andre stood. He was even taller standing.
He rolled his ankle once, testing it. Margaret noticed that too, the way he did it without looking at it, the way someone checks an old wound they've grown accustomed to. He straightened his coat.
He looked at Margaret.
You should be on a train, he said.
Yes, she agreed.
The next one leaves in less than 2 hours.
I know.
I would like, he said, with the particular carefulness of a man phrasing something he does not usually allow himself to phrase, to ensure that you and Sophie board it.
If that is acceptable. Margaret looked at him.
She thought about all the rooms she had learned to read. All the temperatures she had learned to take before stepping through a door. That's acceptable, she said. They had an hour and 43 minutes, which was enough time for a great deal to happen if you were not trying to fill it, and more than enough time for a great deal to happen if you were. They moved to the station cafe, which was technically closing but whose owner, a broad woman in her 50s named Dorita, who had heard about the chain from the kiosk man and was consequently operating on about 400% of her normal curiosity, let them stay at the corner table by the window and brought them food she said was going to waste anyway, which was the specific lie of hospitality that Margaret recognized and was grateful for.
There was soup. There was bread.
There was a second hot chocolate for Sophie, and something dark in a small glass for Gavril that he drank in one movement and set down like punctuation. Andre ate the soup with the focused, systematic attention of someone who has been ignoring hunger for long enough that the body has to be reminded, gently, that it's allowed now. Sophie had brought her book to the table. She was not reading it. She had it open in front of her as a prop, the way she did when she wanted to listen to adults talk without them editing themselves for her presence.
Margaret watched Gavril. He was watching Andre. The way he watched him, it was not the watching of a man who distrusted his brother. It was the watching of a man who was afraid of losing something so completely that he'd decided to keep it against its will, which was a different thing entirely and a much older kind of mistake. You said you'd tell me the significant things, Margaret said to Andre. Andre looked up from the soup. He glanced at Gavril. Gavril gave him nothing, just that flat, holding expression. Our family, Andre said, has a history. A long history.
He paused, and Margaret had the particular sensation of watching someone try to fit something enormous through a door that was designed for normal-sized things.
We are not like most families.
Most families don't chain each other to train stations, Margaret said.
No, he agreed. We are old. Our family.
And old things carry old obligations.
Old agreements.
Old, he looked at the soup.
Debts.
He means this literally, Gavril said.
His English was slightly less precise than Andrei's, slightly more angular. Not like a metaphor. Old.
How old? Sophie said, from behind the book. Both men looked at her.
Old, Andrei said.
Like the castle lord in my book, Sophie said.
Not a question. Margaret set down her spoon.
She looked at Andrei. She looked at the soup. She looked at his hands. She thought about the smell of stone churches. She thought about the way he'd said I am capable of being dangerous with the flatness of a fact rather than the weight of a confession.
She thought about the chain. Old iron. Old links. Old agreements.
She was 34 years old and she had not, in her entire life, been a person who chose comfortable explanations when uncomfortable ones fit the evidence better.
All right, she said. All right? Gavril said.
All right, she said again.
Continue. Andrei looked at her with that expression again.
The wall that catches. The disagreement between Gavril and myself, he said slowly, is about a choice I made.
Some years ago.
I involved myself with a situation I should have left alone.
There was a woman.
Her family owed our family a debt, which in our world is a significant thing.
She wished to be free of it. I helped her.
You freed her from the debt, Margaret said.
Yes. And your family was angry.
Our family, Gavril said, with careful weight, has rules.
The rules are old.
They are there because the alternative is chaos. Andrei decided his opinion of the rules was more important than the rules themselves.
And the woman? Margaret asked. She is free, Andrei said.
She has her life.
She is in France. She does not know our name anymore.
You let her forget.
I insured it.
Something in that, the precision of it, the I insured it, landed in Margaret's chest with a small, specific weight. And, what was Gavril afraid you were going to do this time, she said.
A silence. Gavril's hands tightened around his empty glass. There is a man, Andrei said. In Wrocław.
He owes a debt to our family. He has a family of his own now.
Children. He paused. I was going to Wrocław.
Margaret looked at him very steadily.
You were going to free him? Yes. And Gavril found out? Yes.
She looked at Gavril.
And you chained your brother to a wall to stop him?
Gavril's jaw was working. If Andrei does this again, there are consequences for him that I cannot. He stopped. There are those in our family who would not allow it twice. So you were protecting him, Margaret said. I was protecting him from himself. No, Margaret said, quite gently. You were protecting yourself from losing him.
Those are not the same thing.
The cafe was very quiet. Dorota behind the counter was either washing the same cup for the fourth time or had found a reason to stay very still in the corner.
Sophie had put the book down. She was not pretending anymore.
The man in Wrocław, she said to Andrei.
Does he have children the age of the boys Mama is going to look after? Andrei looked at Sophie. Yes, he said. Similar ages.
Sophie looked at her mother.
Margaret looked at her daughter.
There was a whole conversation in that look that didn't need words, because 7 years of moving from city to city, 7 years of Margaret making the hard choice rather than the comfortable one, 7 years of Sophie watching her mother decide, it had all been building to this kind of look, the one where they both already knew what was going to happen next and were just confirming it.
Mama is a very good nanny, Sophie told Andrei.
But she is also very good at other things. She is good at helping people who are in hard situations.
I've noticed, Andrei said.
Maybe, Sophie said, instead of going alone, you should go to Wrocław with us.
Gavril made a sound.
Sophie, Margaret said. I'm just saying, Sophie said, with perfect 7-year-old diplomacy, that if he goes alone and something goes wrong, no one knows where he is. But, if he goes with us, we are witnesses. And, also, we know a locksmith. There was a beat of pure, arrested silence.
And, then, Andrei laughed. It was not a small laugh.
It was the laugh of a man who has not laughed in long enough that his whole body was surprised by it. It moved through him like something structural giving way, like a very old building discovering it still had good bones. It lasted several seconds. When it finished, his face was different. Not younger, exactly. Lighter, perhaps, in the way that heavy things look lighter when they're not bearing something they've been carrying for too long. Gavril stared at his brother. Margaret thought she saw something move across Gavril's face, that he was not fully in control of something raw and, relieved and, very old, the face of a brother who had been watching someone disappear and had just seen them come back by 1 degree. I have not laughed like that, Andrei said to Sophie, in a considerable time. You should do it more, Sophie told him seriously.
It looks good on you. He looked at Margaret. Margaret looked back at him. You don't have to come, she said. That's not. Sophie is enthusiastic. It's not an obligation. I know. And, whatever happens in Wrocław, whatever you do or don't do, that's your decision. I won't interfere with it. I know that too.
I just mean Margaret, he said. It was the first time he'd used her name.
Not Mrs. Holloway. Not you.
Just her name, in that accented English where the consonants had weight.
I know what you mean. I have known for some time what you mean.
You are very transparent for someone who thinks they are being careful. She opened her mouth.
Closed it.
That is a compliment, he said. In my experience, people who have nothing to hide and nothing to gain are very rare.
You are one of them. It is notable.
She looked at the table. She thought about the sandwich divided in two. The hostel in Lodz. The room where a man had looked at her wrong. The 7 years of careful reading, careful distance, careful management of a world that was frequently unkind.
I have things to hide, she said.
Everyone does, he said.
I mean that what you want is visible. You want Sophie to be safe. You want work that uses the thing you're good at. You want to feel like the choices you make are the right ones. He paused. You don't want anything from me.
That is the rare part. She looked up at him.
What do you want? She said.
He was quiet for a moment. To do the thing in Wrocław, he said. And, then, I am not sure. I have been not sure for some time.
That's honest.
You said you liked honest questions.
I assume you also like honest answers.
Gavril was looking at his empty glass. He was doing it with the careful attention of someone who was working very hard at not listening to a conversation he is absolutely listening to.
If you come to Wrocław, Margaret said, and you do the thing, what happens to you after?
With your family.
Andrei's expression didn't change. There are consequences. Can you bear them?
He looked at her steadily.
I have borne worse. That's also not the same as all right.
The corner of his mouth moved.
No. It is not.
Sophie had migrated, fully and, without ceremony, to the chair beside Andrei. She had her book open on her knee and was tilting it so he could see the illustrations. He was looking at them with the grave attention he gave everything, as if even a children's illustrated fairy tale deserved to be considered properly. This is the Lord, Sophie said, pointing to a figure at a tower window. He watches but he doesn't come down.
Because he's forgotten how.
Yes, Andrei said. But, at the end he does.
He comes down.
And, it's hard and, he doesn't know how to do it well at first.
Does it work out? Andrei said.
Sophie considered the last page thoughtfully.
Sort of, she said. He's still scary. He doesn't stop being what he is. But he learns to be it differently. Around people, instead of away from them. Andre looked at the illustration for a long moment.
That is, he said quietly, a very good ending.
The announcement came over the loudspeaker. The last train to Wrocław. Platform 4. Departing in 30 minutes. Margaret stood.
She organized their bags with the muscle memory of a woman who has done this exact movement in 40 different stations, and each time it was the same: the bag, the coat, the check that Sophie had everything, the deep breath before the next thing.
She looked at Andre. He was already standing. He had already put on his coat.
Gavril stood too, slowly, with the look of a man who has lost an argument he started and is currently in the process of deciding whether he minds.
Gavril, Andre said.
Don't, Gavril said.
I was only going to say, I know what you were going to say. Gavril picked up his glass and put it down again. He looked at Margaret. You are a strange woman, Mrs. Holloway.
I've been told that, Margaret said.
You should have gotten on the first train. Probably.
Instead you stayed and, he gestured vaguely at the table, the soup, the laughing, the book, the entire improbable evening. You did this.
Yes.
He looked at her for a long moment.
Then, at Andre.
Then, at Sophie, who was waiting with her backpack adjusted and her hand out toward her mother. Take care of him, Gavril said to Margaret.
He is very bad at asking for things. I noticed, Margaret said. And, you.
He crouched down to Sophie's level, which was clearly not something he did often but, which he managed with a certain stiff dignity.
You are the loudest 7-year-old I have ever met. That's what everyone says, Sophie told him pleasantly.
It is a good thing, he said. And stood, and put his hands in his pockets, and went back through the maintenance gate, because Gavril was the kind of man who left through the same door he came in.
The three of them walked to platform 4.
The night was cold and the train was waiting, its windows orange-lit against the dark, and Sophie was holding Margaret's hand and talking about whether the Lord in the book would have had a different life if someone had knocked on his door earlier. And Andre was walking beside them, not close, but not separate either. The distance of someone learning to calibrate, learning that beside someone is different from behind and different from in front and that the difference matters. His ankle, where the chain had been, was faintly marked by the cold. He walked without the chain and the walking was the same contained quality, the same bearing, but something in the line of his shoulders had shifted.
Not much. 1 degree, maybe 2. Margaret noticed.
She noticed the way she noticed everything, without comment, without explanation, without needing it to be more than what it was.
They boarded the train.
Sophie found a window seat and pressed her face to the glass immediately, though it was dark and there was nothing to see. Some habits are not about seeing, they are about the position itself, the act of looking toward whatever is coming.
Andre sat across from them.
He folded his hands.
He looked at the window.
The train began to move, and Krakow Central slipped away behind them, and somewhere back there platform 4 was just a platform again, an empty bench, a maintenance gate, a mark on the tiles where a chain had dragged.
Andre, Sophie said. He looked at her. When we get to Wrocław, she said, will you come down from the tower?
He looked at this child for a long, serious moment. The child with the worn shoes and the fourth-time book and the grandmother who gave her something in Romanian about a lord at a window.
I will try, he said. Sophie nodded, satisfied.
She pressed her face back to the window. Margaret watched Andre watching the dark landscape moving past, the fields and low hills and the occasional cluster of lights that was someone's town, someone's life, organized and lit against the night. He watched it the way people watch things they have been away from for a long time, not with longing, exactly. With the particular attention of someone beginning to remember what it looks like to be in the world rather than above it. Outside, the rain had stopped. The train moved south and west, toward a river city and a big house and 2 boys who needed someone to teach them that the world was both serious and fun. and 3 people who, between them, were carrying the specific and improbable weight of an evening that had started with a chain on a platform and ended, somehow, with soup and laughter and a very long journey with somewhere, finally, to be. Margaret opened her notebook. She wrote, bench, Sophie's hair, diesel, blue scarf, rain. She looked at what she'd crossed out earlier. She wrote, chain, and this time she didn't cross it out. She wrote, Andre. She wrote, the chain came off. She closed the notebook. Outside, the dark fields moved past, and the train carried them south, and the night held them all the way to Wrocław.